Welcome everyone. I'm Tracy Fitzpatrick and I'll be your moderator today. Thank you so much for joining us here at Netcom Learning, a market leader in promoting lifelong learning, training, and talent development solutions. We are very excited to host today's event, AWS Discovery Day, securing your AWS Cloud. And presenting today's topic is Terumi. Terumi is an Amazon AAI training consultant and author holding more than 25 years of experience in IT. Her passion for cloud computing developed at a very early age. Being a teenager, she always showed her enthusiasm for understanding the technologies that make computers tick. This deep sense of curiosity on technology led her to achieve all the associate, professional, and specialty certifications and was recognized as an AWS Authorized Instructor Champion. Now, please bear in mind that this is an overview of a very robust topic. We offer a collection of technical and business courses that can be tailored to your specific requirements. If you are interested in a further discussion, you can make an appointment with our learning consultants through our website at netcomlearning.com. Today's session is also being recorded, so you'll get free access to the recording in the next 24 hours via email. Netcom Learning helps customers build innovative learning organizations by achieving a smarter workforce, adapting to change, and driving growth. We do this with a broad catalog of offerings, developing customized learning plans, and our global delivery capabilities. Since 1998, we have been empowering organizations with our managed learning services to help them reach optimal performance results and address challenges. We do have 9 practice areas in which we specialize. They encompass people, process, and technology training. Today's presentation is from the Cloud Practice Area. Netcom Learning offers a comprehensive training portfolio of courses for the topic being covered today. Our upcoming classes include various trainings on the given courses. You can also access a variety of marketing assets, such as the free training and blogs, by clicking on the available event handout. These offerings can be found with a simple search on our website at netcomlearning.com. In today's session, we'll cover the different security design principles that will help you to plan your security approach in the AWS Cloud and provide information on resources you can use to further your knowledge around security on AWS. And now I would like to give you a quick overview of the logistics before we get started. To begin with, you do have the option to view in full screen by clicking on the full screen button on the right side of the GoToWebinar viewer. Simply hit the escape key to exit the full screen. Everyone has been muted except for our presenters. Feel free to submit any questions you have for the presenters here in the questions pane, and we will address them at the end of the session. And to get the best out of today's events, we've included the slides, courses we talk about, and marketing assets in the handout section of your GoToWebinar viewer. You may refer to them at any time to get a better understanding of today's topic. And we do realize that some of you may have to leave early and want to let you know that as you do leave the session today, you will be presented with a short survey. We would like to request for you to take a quick moment to participate in that survey. Your feedback really helps us understand your learning experience and improve our future sessions for you. The survey answers are measured on a scale of 1 to 5, 5 representing outstanding and 1 representing poor. And now I'd like to pass this over to our trainer to present today's topic. Hey, Terumi, thank you so much for joining us today.
Hey everyone, welcome and welcome today to the AWS Discovery Day. The title for today is Securing Your AWS Cloud. And this is going to be about a little less than 90 minutes or so. And I will have time for you to ask your questions at the end. So I hope you find this interesting. My name is Terumi, by the way. I think you see my description at the beginning of the webinar. All right, so let's go and get started and see what we're going to see today. Here is the agenda. So let me go over that. Number one, the first topic is for you to understand security benefits and also your responsibilities in using AWS Cloud. Okay, and I'm going to take this straight from what AWS says, so we'll be talking about that. Number 2, explore different design principles for security in the cloud. So I have about 5 or 6 principles that we'll go over. This is once again coming from the official documentation of AWS. And number 3, explore different AWS services to improve security posture. So I'll kind of pick and choose different types of security services that AWS has as of this recording. Okay, and I have a Q&A at the end for you. Okay. All right, so let's go ahead and get started with the first one. The first one here, understanding security benefits and responsibilities of using the AWS Cloud. And let's take a look and see what that's all about. Firstly, before we talk about these responsibilities and such, let's kind of go over what security is. So I have in here, security equals protection. Okay, and basically we are talking about IT security. So we are definitely talking about protecting IT resources, whatever protection means, right? And we'll discuss, what that may mean to us. So the definition of security then is that the IT resources that we're talking about is definitely the data and everything that kind of surrounds data. So I have here compute, which is the whatever crunches data, right? So we're talking about CPU, RAM, any type of specialized hardware that you may be using on AWS. We have storage, right? So there are different types of storage. I'm not sure if you're familiar with them, but we have something called block storage, where you can install applications. You have, object storage, where one can upload large amounts of data, file sharing, and caching. And then we have network, right? So the network that we use in AWS is virtualized network. Sometimes people refer to them as SDN, software-defined network. So yeah, we'll just go ahead and see what kind of security features that's available on the network. And then also, these data have to be handled. People have to see them. So, where do you display and access the data is also important when you're considering security. All right, so then now that we have that done, one more thing about basic security. So if you take any security classes, they'll mention this thing about CIA. And what CIA is are the aspects of your resources that you're protecting. What I mean by that is C stands for confidentiality. So confidentiality ties to accessing your data. So sometimes we call that access control. And access control refers to applying proper permissions to people that must access the data, whether they have full access, they have read-only access, or anything in between. Confidentiality tied to proper people having proper access to data, and a lot of people not having access to data. So if confidentiality is broken, then you'll have data breach. Integrity is about data tampering. So data must be protected so that people can't go in there and just change it anytime they want to. So if integrity is broken, then you have data tampering. And then last but not least, availability. So availability is talking about access to data. And if someone breaks availability, then we lose access, or we usually call that denial of service. All right, so that's the basics of security, okay? Now let's move into why, is it so important then for us to consider, especially security in the cloud, specifically something like AWS, because AWS service and other cloud vendors that you may know, they are in general called public cloud vendors, right? So public cloud means that the cloud services that we will be accessing is accessed through the internet. Okay. So if you're used to having your data, let's say in your computer or data in your data center, they're usually not connected to the internet so people can access them, not that much, right? But if you move into the internet, so if you go into AWS, for example, everything they want access is going to be through the internet, one way or another. Now, there is a very specialized service where you don't have to go through the internet, but that's usually reserved for big companies that has needs to access AWS directly without going into the internet. So I would say that would be an exception most of the time. So the public cloud service then is about accessing all our resources through the internet. So now just kind of imagine all your important data, whether you like it or not, you have to go through the internet, right? So I hope you understand that that's why security is pretty important, because your data is out there, okay? And you have to actively seek for people to be give limited access so that only you have access, or the people that you choose have some access that they need, right? So I have some points listed on this slide. I mean, there are many reasons why these security concerns are enhanced when it comes to accessing the internet resources. Okay, you may say, oh, data breaches. Well, that's true even if you're not into let's say internet. You don't have to be on AWS to worry about data breaches. That's true. Okay, but for the reasons that I just mentioned, the fact that everything's out on the internet, we have to be especially careful about these things. Now, some of these points I've actually highlighted because I think they are kind of special, not just any security risk, but specific to something like shared resources. So take, for example, shared technology vulnerabilities. Well, cloud means, one of the definitions of cloud is that you're sharing resources with other people, right? So we're sharing AWS resources such as servers, network, storage with other customers. That's basically why we get a very reasonable pricing on accessing the cloud. So that means everything's shared. So the risk then is that, well, what if you're doing okay, but somebody else who's sharing that, using that resource is not doing something proper? Would that negatively affect you? You see, and that may or may not be, the case. But there's always that chance that something that somebody else does is going to negatively impact you. Okay. Another one, lack of visibility and control. So I picked that one because that is also a common concern using the cloud, is that a lot of things that AWS is doing or other cloud vendors are doing to provide you with the infrastructure, you actually don't get to see, right? So it's in the cloud, right? So that is, it's not visible to you. The only thing that's visible to you is the fact that you are able to use some services like virtual machines, managed database services. So you see the services and you actually access the services, but you don't actually see the underlying infrastructure. So what if something goes wrong with those underlying infrastructure? Well, the system will just stop working and you may not know why. Okay, and we cross our fingers that AWS is doing their job and that the system's available, pretty consistently, and they are. Okay, but that could be considered to be one of the risks. So there you go. So that's why security risk of public cloud is especially concerning to us. Okay, all right. So let's go ahead and then move into the next topic here, which is let's take a look at some of the news, right? So is really the cloud, is cloud really risky, right? And well, you can kind of make a decision on that by looking at some of the news that you see about data breaches and such. And granted, even before cloud became very popular, we've had data breaches, right? And we've seen big news of companies losing, sensitive data and stuff. But how about the cloud? Okay, so I've kind of picked this from an organization that publishes this kind of stuff, and the data that I picked was 2022. So I have the reference here for you. It's an organization called Zscaler, and I have a link there too. So hopefully on the show note for this webinar that you have access to this link. But they've actually had like about 3 or 4 major news on 2022 related to the cloud. I just picked 2. And the first one I chose was the misconfiguration. Okay, so let's take a look at it. It says 98.6% of organizations have misconfigurations in their cloud environment. Okay, so what's that, right? Well, it's like having, let's say, for example, the very popular misconfiguration that a lot of company has that puts them in trouble is that they're sharing certain files, right? Let's say they're sharing sensitive files, thinking that they're only sharing to their internal people inside their company, and yet because of misconfiguration, those files are shared to the public, right? So it's like, okay, so it's not that hackers got in there. No, it's that we made a mistake and instead of sharing just to a few people, we shared it to the world. That seems to be a very, very common thing. Okay, and you'll find that AWS had its AWS customers had there plenty of cases like this where AWS several years ago made it a little bit more difficult for you to share files publicly, let's say with the service called S3, which is object storage. Let's take a look at the second one, vulnerabilities. 17.4% of organizations are running workloads on vulnerable virtual machine compute instances exposed to the internet that could lead to critical data leaks. Okay, so now that was kind of long, but what is that, right? So this is just a case specifically to virtual machines, right? So they're talking about virtual machines, and they're saying vulnerable virtual machines. Okay, so how do you get a vulnerable virtual machine? Well, you get a vulnerable virtual machine when you, let's say, install an operating system and you don't patch it, right? Or you set up a virtual machine without putting proper firewalls up. Okay. Once again, I think it's part of a misconfiguration because somebody forgot or somebody just made a mistake and did not put enough protections around it. So instead of having limited access to these servers, now you're exposing something that may have vulnerabilities, like without a patch. And on top of that, it's available to the internet, so you can have hackers coming in there and such. There you go. Okay, so yes, there's been plenty of cases where there's been incidents in the cloud, right? That's why we need to be careful about security. All right, so one of the things that AWS is well known for is this thing called the shared responsibility model. Now, shared responsibility model first was published in the documentation by AWS. Now, this concept, though, these days are used by all the other cloud vendors as well. So let me kind of explain what this shared responsibility model is all about. Okay, so shared responsibility model is where, as the word states, that we are sharing the security work, right, between AWS and the customer. Okay, and that's mainly because if you were to take AWS and kind of generalize their services, it's like outsourcing, right? Because you say, okay, I'm going to ask AWS to manage the infrastructure, and I'm going to use that infrastructure to build my system. Let's say it's virtual machine, let's say it's containers, let's say it's a managed database, what have you, right? So you're using their services, but underneath it all, it's being managed by AWS. So, and remember I told you about the visibility, how you can't really see what's happening on the infrastructure because it's being managed by AWS. Well, because you don't see it, if you can't see it, you can't manage it, right? Okay, so the only people who sees it are the AWS. So AWS have to be responsible for securing those services, that specifically infrastructure. We're talking about the data centers, we're talking about physical hardware, physical network, and the way they provide services to us, any kind of software that they use to provide service to the customers. That's their responsibility. So in this slide, it's in the picture that you see on the left. And by the way, this is the AWS image that I took from the link that you have right below there. Okay, so if you want to learn about it more, please go to that link and see their shared responsibility model. But the orange piece, that underlying piece, that's the AWS responsibility. Okay, so access, let's say, take for example something like access control. Deciding who has access to these physical hardware, who has access to the data center. Well, that's up to AWS and make sure that they are doing their part in securing the infrastructure. But what sits on top of it? So in this case, it would be something like virtual machine, right? So with the virtual machine, if you look at the way at the top, you see customer data, right, at the top. Well, somebody has to decide, okay, we're going to put that data out onto the internet. Who decides that? Well, not AWS, right? AWS says, here are the pieces, here are like the Lego pieces that you could put together and create your system. Now, how you use it, it's up to you. Make sure that you stay within the terms of service. But if you're within terms of service for AWS, you can put anything out there, and you can accidentally put something that should not be out there too, right? So but that's the customer's responsibility, not AWS. And if we're talking about virtual machine, choosing your operating system and then patching your operating system and putting up a firewall to, control access to your virtual machine, that is all customers' responsibility. You see? So the access control to your resources are customers' responsibility. Access control to the underlying infrastructure is the AWS responsibility. Even though we're talking about access control, those responsibilities are split. That's why it's called a shared responsibility model. Okay. What's important about this is that, yes, it is an important concept for you to understand that not everything is responsibility of AWS, that yes, the users have certain responsibilities, but also to understand what are those things, what am I responsible and what is AWS responsible for? So, having clear understanding about that is the beginning of deciding what you must do. And just so that you know, when you go to that link, they're going to show you a couple of different pictures of what you see on the left, okay? So the one that I'm showing you right now is for something like a virtual machine. But if you use different services, like, for example, there's something called a managed services. So managed services like a database, right? So there is a service called RDS, Relational Database Service, where AWS will take greater responsibility for managing that. So they will install the operating system, they will install the database, and they will maintain the patches for the database. So it's a totally different service, and AWS will take more responsibility, and you will take less responsibility. So the line between the orange and the blue will move up and down depending upon the type of service. So if you're interested in that, please go ahead and click on that link and look for it. It's a pretty nice blog that explains this whole thing. Okay. All right. So now I hope that part kind of lets you know why it's important to think about security, especially for a public cloud like AWS, and what your responsibility is in this. So it may vary depending on the service, but you do have some responsibility for securing your part of the data. All right. So now let's move on to the next topic. So here, we're going to explore different design principles for security in the cloud. Now here, I'm going to be using my whiteboard a little bit. Okay, I'll kind of mix it up, but let's go in and check it out and see what these design principles are. Okay, so here we go. Now, the design principles that I'm going to be talking about comes from the AWS documentation called the Well-Architected Framework. Now, Well-Architected Framework is composed of it has 6 in here, but there's actually, I believe there's actually 7. And so they've recently added another one called sustainability pillar. But, oh, actually, no, it is 6. Yeah, it is 6. So they actually have 5, but there's a 6th one that's not shown here. So there's a link underneath. Once again, if you go there, there'll be 6 pillars. The first one is operational excellence, second one is security, third one is reliability, fourth one is performance efficiency, fifth one is cost optimization, and the 6th one is sustainability. And the one that we're going to be talking about is security. Okay. Now, for each of these well-architected framework, AWS gives you the design principles for each of those topics as well as best practices. Now, in this webinar, we're not going to be talking about best practices. So if you want to know, hey, what does excellent companies do when it comes to security, please check out that link and look at the best practices, okay? The only thing that I'm going to go through here with you is the design principles. And the design principles is basically what you see there. So it's like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 design principles, okay? And I'm going to go through one by one and give you a brief explanation of what the design principle is. Every one of those is related to the security pillar, which is number 2 in their Well-Architected Framework. By the way, Well-Architected Framework is a very good documentation. AWS came up with that because they were pretty much the first company to make it big in the cloud service provider space. And there was really no one else that was providing, what should we do? Like, what is the best thing to do? What is the design principle? There's really no documentation like that for AWS. That's why they created their own. So it's been around for a long time. I don't exactly remember when they created it, but AWS has been in business since 2006. So they have a lot of experience behind these documentations. So I would, that's why I'm going to introduce, what their design principles are to you. Okay. Alrighty. So the first one is design principle is implementing a strong identity foundation. And this is the access control. Okay, so the access control is, as I already mentioned, it's pretty critical, right? Because that's where a lot of companies make a mistake. And remember the misconfiguration and how they were sharing data that they were not supposed to? Well, it's a problem with access control. Okay, so access control is you deciding who has access to what at what permission. Okay, so here, let me just quickly read the overview for you. Okay, it says that this involves using AWS Identity and Access Management, IAM. By the way, IAM is a service that's available on AWS. And that controls who has access to your resources and what actions they can take. So that means it's the permissions, okay? Who has what permission to access it. So the IAM, the service, allows you to create users in your account. So that's a cloud account, and each with their own unique username and password and any kind of credentials, and then assign permission to those, okay? So here I'm going to show you on the whiteboard how this usually works, okay? All right, so I hope you're seeing the whiteboard now. Now, when we're talking about IAM, here we go. Let me put IAM up here. What IAM does is this. So let's say you have a server that you want to control access, okay? And let's say you have a person that you want to give access to. Right? And the IAM kind of stands, let's see. So let's say the IAM kind of stands right there. Okay, so what IAM will do is you're able to, let me get out of that red here. Let me just go back into blue. What IAM allows you to do is, one, create users. Okay, and by the way, AWS calls these users principals. And by the way, there are other principals other than users. So the one is user, right, where you log in using ID and password. One is application. Hang on, let me see, application. And the other one is a temporary entity called the role. And IAM also allows you to create permissions. So they're called policy. Okay, and let me just go ahead and put policy like this. You know, you have a policy which gives allow or deny to do stuff, right? So this policy then will be applied to the user. So in this case, this user right here. Okay, but AWS also allows you to assign policy to these servers, and these servers are called, in general, called resources. Okay, so you have a resource-based policy that says, hey, I'm a server and I'm going to allow this person and this person to do this to me, but not that person, right? So now you actually have like a two ways for you to control. So you can assign users policy, you can assign resources policy, and then whether the user is able to access that policy or, you know, have it deny, they'll say, deny or allow, will depend upon the combination of the policy that's applied to the user as well as policy that is applied to the resources. Okay, so that's a quick rundown on what an IAM, Identity Access Management, and the policies can do within the AWS. So that it's a pretty powerful service that you probably should be able to take a look at. Okay. All right, so now going into the, I hope that was clear, right? Now we're going to go into the next one here, which is the maintain traceability. Okay, so what is that, right? So hang on just a moment. Okay, so maintaining traceability means logging, right? So if you're familiar with logs, logs are really important piece of security because it allows you to look at historically what has been done, right? So if you do anything, anything to the server, if you log in, ideally, everything that you do in the cloud is logged somewhere, so that when something goes wrong, you can always go back to the log and say, well, what really happened here? Okay. And then by using the logs, you can monitor them, right? So these days, you see software that will, in real time, monitor these logs and give you warnings as to, hey, there's something weird going on. So those are very, helpful. Now, on the example, I've introduced two services. One is called the CloudTrail, and the other one's called the CloudWatch. So let me go ahead and get there as well. So let's go ahead and go into the whiteboard. So here, let's go with the CloudTrail. Okay, so let's say you have AWS, and let's say this is just AWS in general. Okay. And let's say you have something like a virtual machine service, which is called the EC2, and that you are connected, let's say by the cloud, and that you are accessing that, right? So here we go. There you are, right there. Okay. Now, everything that you do, so let's see here. Let me put, maybe you're accessing it, and doing something to it. It's returning something back to you, all the activities. And they call these API activities because AWS Services has something called the APIs. That stands for Application Programming Interface. Here we go. Right? Now, every single AWS service will have a set of functions that you can call using APIs. Okay. Now, whenever you do access these APIs, CloudTrail, right? Here's a CloudTrail, right? It's going to log it. So every time you do something, let's say you did activity 1 and then you did activity 2, well, the activities are going to be logged, 1 and 2. Okay, so the CloudTrail is a way for you to log everything that you do in AWS with the AWS services. Very, very nice. It's pretty complete. So you can always go back and say, hey, yesterday, what did I do? Yeah, you can go back into CloudTrail. Okay. Then there is the CloudWatch. So CloudWatch is another service, but it's a monitoring service, right? It's not really a logging service per se, but it's a monitoring service. So let's say CloudWatch. Okay, and with CloudWatch, there are actually 3 different types of services. 1, 2, and 3. There's something called CloudWatch Logs, CloudWatch Events, and CloudWatch Metric. So just a short introduction here. So if you have other services in AWS, okay, and they're creating logs, okay, and if you want to watch them, that is, you want to monitor them using AWS, you can go ahead and send those logs to CloudWatch logs. So then the CloudWatch is going to get all those things that are happening inside that log. Then you can actually use something called CloudWatch Events to keep an eye on them and says, hey, if somebody starts up a virtual machine, let me know. Okay, so because that's something happening, right? So if you say, hey, please let me know if a EC2 starts, for example. Okay, so let's say I'm watching that, right? So that's called a rule. So you set up a rule, and let's say one of these is EC2, and maybe one of these things that's happening is starting an EC2. Well, that event is going to be caught by the events rule, and what will happen then is AWS will can actually notify you. you maybe by email. There are other options too, but I'm just kind of giving you one simple example. So that's events, right? Coming from all the information that's being kind of pushed into to CloudWatch. The metric is where it's like a statistical data. So if you say something like, well, I'm kind of interested in the CPU utilization of a let's say EC2 server, because you see if let's say a server is under attack, it's possible that their CPU utilization may go like way up high because somebody's abusing your server. So if you say, well, let me know if the CPU utilization goes above, let's say 85, let's say 80% for 10 minutes, right? So you say CPU utilization, percentage utilization above 80% for 10 minutes. Okay, let's say that's what you want, right? So that is called the alarm, and you could set that in the CloudWatch metric. So if the your server is indeed having the CPU utilization above 80% for longer than 10 minutes, then the metric is going to reach its threshold. Then you can once again take action, such as notifying you. There you go. So that's basically what CloudWatch would do, right? So it's one of the cornerstone of security services within AWS. Okay. All right. So now, I hope that is easy to understand. So that is the maintain traceability. So let's go with the next one. Apply security at all layers, right? So this has another name. There is a more generic name called defend in depth. Right? Defend in depth means that you just don't put just one protection. You put 2 protection, 3 layers of protection, 4 layers of protection, just in case one is breached. The second one should slow them down. If the second one doesn't stop them, the third one and the fourth one. So of course, there's a limit as to how many protection you're going to put in there, but layer security is always recommended. Okay, so here overview, the principle involves adding security measures to every layer of your architecture, from edge network down to the application layer. So that always assumes that you have multiple layers of protection. Okay, it's not just AWS, by the way. It's a general security principle. Okay, so let's take a look at that, and I'll apply it to the VPC. So AWS's network best practice is to put multiple layers on their network. So here, let's say you're creating a virtual network, which is called VPC. Okay, so virtual private cloud. Okay, so that's a network. And the way it works is this. So you actually define a network. Okay, and it'll say that's your VPC. So we'll say, that's my VPC. Okay, and let's say that you want to bring up a virtual machine, let's say a web server, and that you want to give that web server access from the internet. Okay, so if that's the case, let's put an internet out here. Let's see here. So let's say we'll put an internet here someplace, and then you have users that's going to be accessing it, right? Now, where's your server? Well, before you can actually put a server in here, we have to put several things inside this VPC. One of the things is a subnet. So let me put a subnet out here. So let's say we have 2 subnets, one public subnet, and let's say we'll put one private subnet. So private subnet is where people have indirect access to your servers, whereas the public subnet is where people have direct access to your servers. And it's not recommended that you put too many things on the public subnet because it is exposed to the internet. So if you have something like a web server, you don't want that to be like directly exposed to the internet. Okay, so for my example, then I'm going to put I'm going to put the virtual machine out here someplace. Okay, so that's your web server, let's say, for example. So that's your web server. And just imagine that this web server has, is connected to that network. Right, so this is your subnet. Okay, and normally you would put, if you don't have anything in here, there's no way that you can access this server because nobody has direct access from the internet. So normally you would put something like a load balancer out in the front. So let's say I put a load balancer out here. Okay, so here's I'll just put LB. Okay, just remember that as a load balancer. And the load balancer is the one that's going to give you access to your server, and people will access your load balancer. You see how your server is not directly accessed? Okay. Now, I haven't really put any security features in here, so let me go ahead and put that up right now. So one of the security features that you do have is like a doorway into your subnet. Okay, so that's a firewall, but it's a firewall that is a doorway into your subnet. So in this case, I could put right here. I'll put right here I'll put something that looks like a firewall. There we go. There you go. Okay. So this is called network ACL. Right. So network ACL stands for network access control list. So it's a type of firewall. You can control who goes in and out of your subnet. Great. Okay. But that's not enough, right? Remember, the principle here is you have multiple layers of security. So another security is that you can actually put a firewall here. See right there, right at where your subnet is connected to your EC2. Okay, so it's not a generic firewall that's protecting the subnet itself, but it's actually protecting individual servers. So this one is called the security group. So let me move this up a little bit. It's called security group. Okay, so that's another type of firewall. Okay, and there is something else. So I think it was introduced back in a couple years ago, maybe 2.5 years ago. There was something called a network firewall. So you could definitely put network firewall here as well. Now, if this is a web server, which I said that it was, you could put an additional firewall called the WAF, Web Application Firewall. So I'm just going to kind of put them together like that a little bit, okay? Right, so you could put a WAF in here. So that's a application firewall. I'll just put FW for firewall. You see, so right there, I put 1, 2, 3, 4 layers. Now I could put additional layers in here, but the picture just gets a little too busy. And I think I'm hoping that you get the idea, what this layered security is like. Okay, so there you go. So this is that principle where you put layered security. Alrighty, so let's go ahead and get back. So that was the applied security at all layers. All right, so let's move on to the next one. The automate security best practices. Yeah, so cloud, things change very quickly, right? So for example, something like the EC2, if you have a scheme called auto scaling, automatic scaling, you can increase the number or decrease the number of servers depending upon the amount of requests that you're getting. So if you have, let's say, web server, let's say 2 just in case, and then you get massive amounts of requests, you say, well, 2 web servers is not enough. We need additional power. So AWS will allow you to increase the number of servers automatically. Okay, so that means when the request increases, boom, you have more servers, and when the request dies down, that server goes away. Okay, so that means you don't know exactly how many servers you have right now. It could be 2, it could be 3, it could be 4, it could be 5 next minute, and then it could go down to 2 the next minute, right? So things do change dynamically in the cloud. So anything you do has to also be as quick, as dynamic, as flexible as your resources are being flexibly changed. So that means your security, you cannot rely on the speed of one person or a group of people, security measures must be automated as well, right? So I hope you appreciate that, right? Because you don't, as a security person, you don't want to be behind everything, right? Says, oh, I thought I was working on that server, but the server's gone now. Okay, so that's why automation is pretty critical. So the overview here is, by automating security, you can respond quickly to threats and consistently apply best practice across your AWS resources. Okay, now there are many tools that will do this for you, but the one that I have here for you as an example is AWS Config. Okay, so what AWS Config does is this. So let's say you turn on AWS Config. So here we go. Let me put AWS Config in here. Okay, so take, for example, AWS Config and what it does. It's actually a configuration manager, change manager type of stuff. So let's say that you have an EC2. Okay, and whenever you create an EC2, AWS Config says, oh, hey, you have an EC2. So it knows what you have. Okay, so then you say, oh yeah, well actually not just one, but I actually have two. It says, oh, hey, you have two. You see, it kind of keeps track of what you have. Okay, not only that, whenever you make some changes, so you say, well, I think I like to make a change here so that, so let's say, this is going to have, more storage. So I've added more storage, so bigger storage, right? Because I got more stuff that I have to save. It says, oh, you've increased the number of, amount of storage. You see? So it keeps all these, it keeps track of all the changes that are happening in your environment. And guess what? When hackers come in, what do? They make changes to your environment. Okay, so that means when hackers come in, or something bad happens, and let's say they start to delete, they bring down your server. That says, okay, at some point somebody deleted the server, and now it's just one. You see? So if you want to know what does my system look like right now, like what do I have and what are the configurations, or what are all the settings, they're called states. What are my states? All you have to do is go look at AWS Config. It's going to know everything. Okay, so this is the way you can see that if something happens that says no, but it's not supposed to do that, right? You're not supposed to delete a server, for example. Then you can actually ask it to take some action. There you go, right? Very similar to the CloudWatch, but CloudWatch is looking for events and metric, whereas the AWS Config is looking for changes that are happening in your environment, and it'll allow you to take some action based on the changes that you are keen about. Okay. All right, so let's go to the next one. All right, protect data in transit at rest. Okay. So I've actually done another webinar on this. This is about encryption. So if you want to know more about encryption, please go take a look at that webinar. There should be a recording on that. But the AWS provides different ways for you to protect sensitive data. And it's not just about encryption, but encryption is huge part about that. Okay. So protecting data in transit means while the data is moving, it should be encrypted. And when the data is stored, it should also be encrypted. Okay, so let me give you just a quick whiteboard on that. So let's talk about S3. All right, so let's say this is S3. So S3 is an object storage. Okay, so object storage means that you have people, uploading objects. That could be images, any kind of files, anything you could think of that's a digital medium. You can go ahead and put it inside S3. Okay, and you could definitely download from S3 as well. It's pretty simple service. But what if you're uploading? You are definitely uploading over the internet, right? So this right here, hang on just a moment. Let me draw this out here. So for example, this part right here is over the internet. Okay, and maybe you just don't want to be sending something sensitive over the internet like that, right? So you could definitely protect that. You can protect this right here, kind of protect, protect this thing like a little tunnel. Okay, here we go. By encrypting it, right? So this is the data is in motion, it's in transit, and you protect it using something called TLS. Transport layer security. Some of you may know this as SSL, secure socket layer, right? So that encrypts the data. So yeah, S3 totally does this for you, okay? And once you have the file, maybe what you want is, you don't want the file just stored there without being protected. So perhaps when this thing goes in here, that you actually encrypt that too. Okay, so it's encrypted. So that is, when the data is stored, you also encrypt that too. So S3 supports many different ways that you can do this. They have something called server-side encryption. And by the way, AWS actually made a change, I think maybe about a year ago. It could be just a little before that. Now, S3 is by default encrypted. So you don't have to do anything. All you do is just create an S3, and the server-side encryption is automatically enabled for you. Okay, so there you go. So that is that encryption part. So protect data in transit and at rest. Okay, and let's go ahead and move on to the next one. Keep people away from data. What? What does that mean? Well, remember, data is one of the things that you have to protect in the cloud, right? So if people do not have direct access to the data, that's less opportunity for them to do something bad to it. But if you don't give them access to data, well, what happens? Right? So you have data, you want people to access it, and yet you're saying keep the data away from the users. What does that mean? Well, what they're saying here is this. What they're saying here is that, for example, let's say you have, let's say there's you, or whoever, right? That's going to go through the internet, and let's say in the AWS environment. So here we go. Let's say this is AWS, right? So here we are, and let's say you have a pretty important data inside your database. All right, so here's database. Okay, and let's say this is one of the AWS databases, such as Relational Database Service. It could be DynamoDB, right? So let's say NoSQL database, DynamoDB, for example. Okay, that's where your important data is. You want to give access to that data to the people, but not directly. So we could actually do something like this. Put up a application in the front. So there's something called Lambda. Okay, so that the person is accessing Lambda. Lambda, by the way, is what's called serverless compute service. So you could put an application in front, like Python application, Java application, whatever, that is going to interact with the user. And then on the other side, that application will access the database. You see? So it's like a two-step process. So you're keeping the user from directly accessing the database. You have something in between so that you have better control as to what the user can do, right? They can't do everything. They can only do things that are allowed for by the application that you have in between. So this is a best practice design. Okay, I'm doing that. All right, so that is that, okay? And the last one that we're going to talk about is prepare for security events, okay? So as we mentioned on the automation, things happen all the time, okay? And when bad things happen very quickly, and it'll spread very quickly in the cloud as well, right? So the overview here is you have to plan for that, right? So plan for bad things to happen, right? So plan for how to handle potential security incidents, right? Because you have to respond to it. And remember the automation? You want to make sure that you have an automated way to respond to some of the predictable bad things that may happen, right? Somebody trying to kind of break into your network, somebody trying to bring down your server, what have you. There are already things that has happened before, and you could pretty much predict that, yeah, those bad things will probably happen. If that's the case, you get prepared for that. Now here, I'm not going to draw this one out. If you look at the example, it says AWS Security Hub. Now, AWS Security Hub is where most of the security related data is collected, so that you can just go to one place, which is called the Security Hub, and you'll see all the warnings and alerts in one place. Then one can automate activities based on what comes into the hub. So it's an automation hub too. Okay. And on the next section that we'll be talking about after a short break, what we'll do is I'm going to introduce to you some of these security services. And some of these services will report back the data into the Security Hub. So it's a pretty nice service, because AWS actually does provide you with lots and lot of security services. But if you don't have the hub, you have to actually go to individual services and find out what's going on, right? And that's going to take a lot of time. And it's much better to have all the warnings come in one place. There you go. So that was the security design best practices, right? Or security design principles that is covered in the well-architected framework. Okay, so this concludes the first half of the webinar. So let's go and take a 5-minute break. I'll see you back in 5 minutes. Thank you.
Sure, we are now going to take a 5-minute break, but before we do that, we are going to launch a quick poll that we want to invite you to participate in. Doing so helps us know how we can better serve you by telling us who might be interested in more information or in taking some additional training. In addition, we have a lot more informative webinars coming up, so please go to netcomlearning.com/webinars in order to register.
All right, welcome back, everyone. So now let's go into the third part of our agenda, which is to explore different types of AWS services related to security. Well, I made a list of the current services that are available, and I hope that's going to be helpful here. So hang on just a moment. All right, so let's go here. I've actually broken this down into about 3 to 4 categories of different types of services. There's just so many, and I may not have a complete one, but I came, I think, as best as I can into giving you a list of these. So the first one, the category that I have is identity and access control. All right. So as I mentioned, identity and access control is really, really important. And if you look at this, so that this category will focus on controlling access, basically, right? And I've already mentioned the IAM, identity and access management. So that's where you create your users, policies, and then match them out up with the resources, and then you determine what permission they have to access certain resources. So that's there, IAM. Now, AWS actually has something called a single sign-on. It's a service that allows you to use your on-premises systems, such as Active Directory, and connect that to AWS so that you don't have to log in twice, you see? So let me kind of show you that. So basically what happens is, let's say, for example, that you have on-premises. So this is on-prem. That is your data center, your office. And let's say we have AWS. Here we go. Okay, and that you already have a system that authenticates, and a lot of companies already do that. So they have something like Active Directory. Okay, and that people are logging in to these systems. So they log in. Now, what you don't want them to do is to have all these same people have to log in again, right, to AWS. So that's like a double login, and you have to manage separate accounts and things, and that gets really messy. So what AWS has is for you to say, okay, so you have Active Directory already inside. People are already logging in. So let me give you a system that's called single sign-on, where one can connect the two services, right? So when they do, they'll have access to AWS stuff, like servers and such, and services, as well as other systems, such as maybe like something like a Salesforce box. Just put in the type of services, the third-party services, SaaS type services. So I'll put in here SaaS, right? Software as a service, services. So that's what SSO will do for you. And the reason why this is good is because now people don't have to have multiple passwords and multiple accounts they have to remember. All they have to remember is, yes, I log into my Active Directory, and that's going to give me permission to access AWS. You see, it simplifies things. And in security, simple is good because complexity can lead to weaknesses and vulnerabilities. You may miss something, right, when some things are complex. So this is a way for you to enhance security, right? It's called single sign-on. There you go. It's pretty handy. All right, so that's it for that category. Okay, let's go for the next one. Threat detection and investigation. So threat detection is any kind of danger that may be lurking inside your account. And investigation is, unfortunately, when something bad happens, after the fact, you say, okay, so what happened, right? And is there something that we could do for the next time so that this doesn't happen again? So that's basically what investigation is, right? And there are two tools. One is called guard duty, and the other one's called the detective. Okay, so I'm going to explain the guard duty. Detective is, well, actually, guard duty is the threat detection, and detective is the investigation type of service. So let me explain to you what guard duty does. Okay, so guard duty is a service that kind of keeps an eye on what's happening in the world, right? So let's say this is the world, okay? And, a lot of bad cyber things are happening, right? So, something's happening here, somebody's attacking here, some kind of viruses, spreading here, malware spreading there, all kinds of things are happening, right, in the world, okay? So these are cyber threats. And of course, part of this world is what's happening inside AWS too, right? So bad things could be happening on AWS. People may be trying to attack AWS. I mean, who knows, right? I mean, they have a huge presence. So I'm sure a lot of things are, a lot of people are trying to attack it and stuff, right? So a lot of things are happening here as well, right? So these are cyber incidences or threats. Okay, and if you could take all that information and understand and say, okay, this is what's happening, that's intelligence, isn't it? Right? It says, what's happening right now? Well, in the world, this is happening. In AWS, this is happening. And put it together, these are all the things that we have to kind of keep an eye on because it's potentially something dangerous, right? So that's the threat intelligence. So let's say that we have a database on that, okay? So let's say we have a database that AWS manages. Okay, so let's say this is a threat intelligence. Where all this information, from the world and from AWS is put in, right? So if you look at the threat intelligence, you pretty much have a good idea what's happening right now that you have to be careful for. And within AWS, your account, right, is AWS. So here, let me put in here, let's say inside here, there you go. That is your account. And if you turn on guard duty, let's say you turn on guard duty. So here, what AWS will do for you is it'll look at everything that's happening in the threat intelligence, and it's going to look into your account. It's going to look into your account right here, okay? And see if something bad that you see in the world is happening inside your account too. That is, the things that people are watching out for, they'll watch out for your account to make sure that nothing is happening in your account. Okay, so that's basically what a guard duty would do, or keep an eye for you on all the bad things that may be happening in the world. If it's happening in your environment, they'll let you know about it. Okay, now they're not going to do anything about it because only you would know if that is something you want to stop or not. But if you have no idea that maybe some hacker is lurking in your account and that's been happening out in the world, wouldn't it be nice if somebody told you, hey, your account seems like the hacker that's kind of going around out there in the world, I think it's in your account too. Maybe you should do something about that. That's basically what a guard duty is. Okay. Okay, so let's go back. Now, detective is the way for you to find root cause for any kind of a problem that may happen. So it's, when I say problem, I don't mean like, oh, server went down, what happened? No, like I think we got hacked. Like how did that happen, right? So because the internet is so dynamic, okay, that it's really hard to find out very quickly, like where did it come from and what did they do and where did it go and like what's the damage and all those questions. And as I mentioned, things come and go all the time. There's got to be a way to use a tool that kind of have all that information available to you. Okay, all the dynamic information too, and that's basically what detective is. So detective has a access to other security services within your account, and you can pull information together and put them together and say, okay, so where did this thing come from? And oh, it came from that area of the world. How did it come in? Oh, it came through this load balancer and through that virtual machine. And then where did it go? Oh, and it accessed this database. And then what did it do? That kind of stuff, right? So then you put it together and say, okay, what's the damage? And is there a way that we can actually prevent that from happening going forward? Okay, so that's a detective. It's a relatively newer service, but it will help you in what's called forensic work. That is, after the fact, after the attack, you find out what happened and how you can improve your protection going forward. All right, so the next category is data protection and encryption. So I've already mentioned encryption. So if you see this thing called a key management service, that's where you create very strong algorithmic keys that you use for encryption, and you can manage that there on KMS. Secrets Manager is if you have something like a username and password in your system that your application has to access. For example, you have an application that have to access the database, but in order to access the database, you have to have the user ID and the password for the database. One thing you don't want to do is to put the username and password inside your application, right? Because if somebody hacks into your application, now they have access to your database, ID and password too, and that's probably not a good thing. So how do you separate, though, the ID and password, the sensitive credentials, from your application? Well, you could use a service called the Secrets Manager. So the Secrets Manager is where you keep your secrets and you give access to, let's say, your application. So your application will access those secrets when they need it. And they won't keep it inside their application. Okay? Certificate Manager. So Certificate Manager is where remember the TLS, the transport layer security that I talked about on S3? I said, okay, when the data is in transit, you could use something like TLS, SSL, right? Well, in order for you to use TLS, transport layer security, or SSL, you actually need to have a certificate, right? Certificates, usually you have to purchase them or you create them on your own. On the AWS, there is something called the Certificate Manager. So you can use that service to create those certificates to enable TLS, right? So, and also the certificates are used for different purposes too. Sometimes they're used for authentication. So there you go. You don't have to create your own. You could go ahead and use the one that's in AWS. Now, Cloud HSM is related to the key management service. So this is where if you need a stronger protection for your encryption keys, more than what you could get from KMS, then you would purchase this service called Cloud HSM. HSM stands for Hardware Security Module, and it's a US government certified strength encryption module. That is, it's a hardware device that you can use on AWS to meet your compliance needs. Okay. Now, the last one here, Amazon Macie, is a type of service called the DLP. Okay, so here is how I would explain that. So the Macie, as I mentioned, it's a DLP. That stands for data loss protection. Okay, or sometimes people call it data leakage protection, so that it stops you from leaking sensitive information. So this actually works on S3. So here we go. We have S3. Okay, and let's say, people are putting in all kinds of information, this object, that object, but somebody makes a mistake and puts up, let's say, a sensitive object in here, maybe, with the social security number, credit card, whatever, right? Whatever that you would consider to be sensitive. Remember I told you on the incidents? This is basically what happens. A lot of people do this accidentally or unknowingly, not maliciously, put sensitive information that is available open to the world, right? And you probably want to catch that before, this is going to cause you problems. It's going to cause you a data leak, okay? So what Macie does, if you turn on Macie, it's going to keep an eye on your S3. Okay, it's going to keep an eye. And if it sees something like that, sensitive, it's going to report to you. It says, hey, I think we actually have a sensitive information in that S3. You should take a look at it, right? So So it's going to create a warning. Okay, so it's really helpful, right? Because even by accident, you do not want to have private information in a publicly accessible or shared S3 buckets, right? So that's basically what Macie is. It's going to stop you from making a mistake like this to accidentally make sensitive information available through S3. Macie only works on S3 right now. Hopefully, it'll expand to other services. But as a minimum, S3 is a major cause for data leakage due to misconfiguration, so that should stop that. Okay. All right. And I believe we are getting to the next one here. Security assessment and compliance. So this is the next to the last category. We just have like one more. But here, this is for assessment, right? It's to check and see how am I doing, right? Type of stuff, right? And also compliance. So if you have any kind of a compliance, like maybe credit card protection compliance, maybe privacy information compliance, whatever the compliance that you have to assess to see if you are in compliance with certain laws and regulations or your internal policy. So what type of tools do we have here? So we talked about Security Hub, right? So we talked about Security Hub, and this is where all your warnings from other services, like, take for example, guard duty. Guard duty warnings actually comes into the Security Hub, okay? And Macie will also come into Security Hub. There are other things that will come into Security Hub. In fact, this thing called Amazon Inspector, anything that Inspector finds will come into the Security Hub. So let's see, what is Inspector, okay? Well, Inspector is where, let's take a look at Inspector. Let's say you have a EC2, or maybe you have, Docker container. Okay, and that you have application running. There you go, you got applications running. Right, and you usually have like an operating system. Containers are a little bit different. Containers have operating system underneath. Okay, so what the inspector would do, inspector will, let's see here, let me put inspector in here. What this will do is it's going to do several types of assessments, right? So the most common one that I usually use is called the vulnerability scan. So it will do a vulnerability scan. On the application and the operating system to see if you have anything that requires a patch, right? And the source of the vulnerability scan, there's a database called CVE, Common Vulnerabilities and Exposures. That is the basis for inspector scan. So if something is reported on the CVE as being, this Windows operating system has this vulnerability, it's going to check and see if those vulnerabilities are present in your virtual machines and applications within your containers. Okay, it's going to give you a list of possible vulnerabilities so that you could take action, such as patching them. Okay, but the inspector actually has a couple more scan types that you can use. One is the AWS best practices. So best practices, it's not mandatory, but it's recommended actions that you take. So you could turn on that scan and it will report to you if any of your applications in EC2 and containers are violating the best practice for AWS. It also has a something called the CIS benchmark. So CIS, Center for Internet Security, has been publishing this thing called the security baseline for the longest time, right? So they have baseline for Windows, they have baseline for various Linux distributions for security, and they'll check and make sure if your configurations for your EC2s and such are in alignment with those baselines. So it's very, very handy tool to have. So if there are some findings, this will be reported to your security hub too if you turn on the security hub. There you go. That's an inspector. And Code Guru, I think it was introduced maybe a couple years ago. Code Guru, for those of you that know application security, it's a application review software or code review software. So a lot of weaknesses that hackers take advantage of are application weaknesses, and those application weaknesses are the way that the application is written, right? So poor coding style, using the way you write your code that makes your application vulnerable. So what Code Guru does is it will look through your application, and you can automate this too, and it'll point out to you some of those practices that you should fix in your application. Okay, not that. So they'll say something like, well, you're using this type of coding style, which could cause something like SQL injection, so you should fix that, etc. So if that makes sense to you, right, you'll appreciate the software. Okay, so I'm more of an application security person. I think this tool is great. So it uses artificial intelligence. It does have a machine learning engine behind it. So it will find these what's called logical type of flaws within your application. It's pretty sophisticated. All right, so the last category is the firewall and distributed denial of service protection. So on the layered security portion of my talk, I've explained to you, I kind of showed you different types of firewalls, right? That goes in like network firewall, a web application firewall, right? Network access control list, and security group, right? So those are like 4 types of firewalls. So yeah, so AWS has like, tons of firewall stuff. And here I've written AWS WAF, web application firewall, okay? I have the AWS network firewall. Now, if you are a pretty big company, and if you have more than one cloud AWS accounts, some companies have multiple accounts. And in those multiple accounts, if you want to have a standard way that you deploy your firewalls with standard firewall rules, so if you have like 10 accounts, you don't have to go to 10 separate times and set up 10 separate firewalls the same way. You can manage that as from one location. And that's basically what a AWS Firewall Manager will do for you. So it will allow you to manage these firewall rules in one place. And then that will be distributed and monitored in multiple accounts. And AWS Shield is the way for you to protect your account from distributed denial of service, right? Distributed denial of service, if you've heard about botnets and, people are just like sending you massive amounts of traffic to kind of bring your system down. That's distributed denial of service, and it's happening all the time. Right? It's very, very prevalent because people can launch these types of attacks in an automated fashion. So one has to be protected all the time, right? But it's really hard for one individual to try to protect yourself from these massive types of attacks. So AWS is actually protecting you from those. So there's something called Shield Standard that just by being or having the AWS account, that you are already under the protection of this thing called the Shield, Standard Shield. But if you need more additional protection, like, if you are one of these companies that people are like constantly trying to target you with a DDoS, then you could probably use Shield Advanced, right? And Shield Advanced is something that you do pay for, but it gives you a much more higher level of protection from DDoS. There you go. So, and there may be, a couple of services that I may have missed, but I think these are the main type of services. Now here, what we covered was the typical services that are available related to security. Okay, so I hope you were able to see some of the new services that are made available. So up until this point, what did we do? So at the very beginning, we covered why is it important to have security in the public cloud, such as AWS, right? And then I went through several design principles from the well-architected framework, okay? Then I just finished covering several of these different AWS services, which are security related, that will assist you in improving security for your AWS. Okay, and that basically concludes my part of the content. and I'll be happy to accept any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Terumi. That was very informative. I know everyone is looking forward to the Q&A session, so go ahead and start putting your questions into the questions panel. And now I'd like to give the presentation rights over to Rimi, our vendor manager, to introduce our promotions and webinar-related courses.
Thank you, Tracy, and thank you, Teremi, for this insightful session. I believe everyone must have learned something new today or would have been able to brush up their skills around the fundamentals of AWS Cloud. I would quickly like to take you through some of our hand-picked resources, which we think will immensely help in accelerating your AWS Cloud scaling journey. Well, this document here of sharing on my screen, this has been shared with you all in the handout section of GoToWebinar panel. You can download this document and access all the resources and browse all the offerings we have curated for you. So first up here is the list of our recommended courses, which we feel will best suit your learning journey after attending our masterclass. All these courses are hyperlinked. Feel free to go through them post-event and check out the course descriptions, prerequisites, and the value it can add to you and your team's skill sets. Additionally, we have curated a blend of resources, including our upcoming and on-demand events, as well as informative and educational blogs. You can make the most of these resources to gain extensive knowledge on the AWS topics they cover. Next up, I am thrilled to introduce the AWS Skill Builder, a dynamic learning center featuring over 600 digital courses crafted by AWS experts. I'm sure most of you must be aware of AWS Skill Builder. What is unique about this platform are the engaging game-based learning experiences. So through AWS Cloud Quest and team-based competitions on AWS Jam events. If you're hearing these terms, Cloud Quest and Jam events for the first time, I would highly recommend you click on this button and you go to our AWS Skill Builder page. I'm sure you will be amazed to see what all the Skill Builder has to offer. They have set of these gaming experiences in practical real world scenarios, which makes it so easy to understand concepts, technology, and processes. And it makes it so interesting for the learner. And for organizations, it saves a lot of time on employee skilling and ultimately enhancing the efficiency and productivity. As someone at Netcom who values continuous learning, I'm confident that AWS Skill Builder will be a game changer for any organization looking to upskill their workforce on AWS technologies. I encourage you to explore the diverse range of digital courses and experiences it offers. You can simply, as I said, click on this button right here, learn more, and you can explore more about the Skill Builder and the pricing aspect of this. Moving on to the next offering. Our free AWS e-learning courses follow a self-paced training model wherein you get the liberty of accessing extensive course-related videos that are delivered by the AWS subject matter experts on the go. So these videos cover the availability on the device of your choice. So you can access them from your laptop, your tablet, or from your phone as well. There are more than 280 videos covering various AWS topics explained in a very easy to comprehend language. You can simply sign up for free, watch these videos, and make the most out of them. Also here, I would like to inform you that this session is being recorded. So in case you want to refer back to any of the topics that the trainer might have covered in today's session, we will be sharing the recording link with you through emails, and also you can access it here by clicking on this button. So you have to download this handout for that. And then if you want to revisit any topic, you can just simply click on the access recording and you can revisit the session and learn at your own pace. Now, apart from our virtual sessions, you can also catch the relevant updates related to IT and business trainings on our social media handles. So please feel free to follow us on LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, and subscribe to our YouTube channel for all the latest updates. Our official pages and channels are linked here on the icons. Finally, if you have any suggestions regarding the topics you would like us to cover in our upcoming webinars and masterclasses, please don't hesitate to send us a direct message, or you can leave a comment on our social media posts, or you can just simply email us at info@netcomlearning.com. We would definitely try to come up with the sessions on your suggested topics. Thank you once again for joining us today. Over to you, Tracy.
Thanks so much for guiding us through that information, Remy. And now we're going to go ahead and jump right into our question and answer session. Our first question for the day is, how does AWS handle incident response and recovery in the event of a security breach?
Okay, yes, thank you very much for that question. So, everything happens, especially on the incident response, by preparing for it. So do you remember the automated actions, the part that I talked about? And in order for you to have automated action for any type of incident response, you have to foresee those things happening first, right? So everything kind of starts with the preparation, right? By having certain expectation that these things probably will happen. When it does, what mechanism within AWS is going to handle that, right? Then once you decide on that, let's say, I think I'm going to get network attack, I think I'm going to get an application attack, right? Those are the kind of, a mental process that we'll go through. Then there must be a way for you to be able to detect those activities when it happens, right? So you have to be able to say, well, is it happening now, right? Or is it not happening now? And how would you know that, right? Well, you have things like guard duty, you have things like security hub, you have things like CloudTrail. All that type of the services that I mentioned will help you to detect some anomaly happening, right? So that will be the second step. So after preparation, you detect. Then the next thing you need to do is you have to kind of say, well, I have to contain that. If something's happening now, I have to make sure that it doesn't spread, right? So you have to have some sort of a mechanism for you to contain your the attacks that are going on, or perhaps even eradicating them. That is, getting rid of them, right? There are various techniques that you can use to do this. So, for example, something like if you see an attack happening on the EC2, there's a way for you to disconnect that EC2 and isolate that EC2 virtual machine so that no new things can go in and nobody can actually connect to it. Then you can move into the next step, which is recovery. So recovery is bringing back the clean version of whatever it is, right? So if it's an EC2, not the contaminated version, but the clean version of it, right? So this may be from a backup that you've taken. This may also be from a second server that you have running in parallel. I mean, there are many ways to recover. It just depends upon how quickly you need to recover. The cheapest one is to have a backup so that when something bad happens, you bring back the backup and you recover from that. The most expensive one is to have a parallel environment running so that when something goes down, you already automatically have another environment already up and running, okay? Then the last but very important step is to see what happened, like what happened there, right? Lessons learned, okay? So that you can learn from that and do something better so that these incidents won't happen in the future. But you can't stop 100% of stuff. So you always need the capability to respond. But certainly if there was something that you could have done to stop that from happening, then you take that action then. So once again, there are like 5 steps. One's preparation. The other one is detection and analysis. The third one is in containment or eradication. Then you recover. And then you go through lessons learned. By the way, you would use something like detective to do lessons learned and say, whoa, what happened here? Okay.
Second question is, can you explain the concept of AWS Security Hub and its role in overall cloud security?
Yeah, sure. Okay, so during my discussion, I did mention about the hub and what it does in general, right? So the main purpose of the security hub is to aggregate and centralize the security information and findings that you're getting from other security services, right? So for example, Security Hub can aggregate data from Amazon Guard Duty, right? The one that we talked about, Inspector, Macy, right? And there may be some third-party solutions that may also send data to the Security Hub. So it's the central location where you would go for all the findings that you're getting for security. Also, Security Hub actually has this thing called the automated security checks. So it can actually do some checks for compliance checks based on the industry standard. Remember the one that I told you about CIS? It can actually do CIS checks as well. So it does provide you with what's called a compliance score to understand your overall compliance status. It will also, because it's receiving all the findings, you can also look at some trends that are happening in your security posture. And from Security Hub, you can actually initiate automated responses for incident response as well. Okay, and also, last but not least, it does integrate with other third-party solutions. So it extends, what AWS has into something more customizable solutions for you. Okay, so that's basically what a Security Hub is all about.
Let's take another one. What are the best practices for managing access and permissions in an AWS environment?
Oh yeah, so that's really important, right? So if I were to refer back to my discussion, so it's the access control, right? And remember, access control, IAM, identity and access management. So what does that do? Well, there is this principle in security called principle of least privilege. So the principle of least privilege is stating that, if somebody has to do something on AWS, you give them that permission to do that, but nothing over that. That is, don't over permission, right? Obviously, you can't under permission, because if you're under permission, they can't do the work. But you don't want to over permission, right? It's like saying, oh yeah, it's kind of hard to figure out what she needs, so let's give her admin access. No, right? Don't do that, okay? So, holding to the principle of least privilege is definitely one thing you do, and that's what you base your permissioning on. So, well, what permission does she need? What permission does he need? Well, based on the least privilege. What do they have to do, right? And also, rather than creating users in AWS for everything, remember the temporary principle that I mentioned is called roles. So AWS recommends that you leverage using these temporary entities, IAM roles, and allowing applications to take on that role's permission when they need some extra permission. So if you have an application that has to access something, allow them to what's called assuming the role, so they have the permission in that moment to access whatever the data or whatever activity that they need to do. Okay, and also another thing about ID and passwords that's related to these principles is that just like how in our regular accessing our regular PCs and stuff, we regularly rotate credentials, right? Change passwords and stuff, because the longer you use the password, there's more chance that somebody's stolen it, right? So that they can log in as you. So you want to make sure that you regularly rotate these credentials. Okay. And when you are using AWS in a major organization, and remember I told you that some companies will use multiple accounts. Okay, and when you start using multiple accounts, you're going to have multiple places where people have to access things, and access control can become very complex. So you want to simplify it by centralizing things. Now, AWS actually has this thing called AWS Organization. It's not a generic term. It's actually a service called AWS Organization that actually allows you to centralize a lot of activities for multiple accounts. So access control, manage it using the AWS Organization, so manage it in a central place. Okay, and also you probably heard about multi-factor authentication, right? That term is pretty common these days, where rather than just using username and password, to have them use something like a token. So AWS does recommend highly that you use an MFA, especially for people with higher privileges, such as admins, to allow them to use MFA rather than just a username and password. So I think there are other things that you could possibly do, but I think I've pretty much hit the top 5 that you probably need to do on AWS.
And finally, we have time for one more. What are the recommended steps to follow when conducting a security assessment of an AWS environment?
Yeah, so if you go back into my discussion about assessment and assessment services, remember I told you about assessments using Inspector, assessment using Code Guru, right, and assessments using as part of the Security Hub. So, but in that discussion, I've also mentioned that Inspector is good for vulnerabilities. Code Guru is good for code, right? Application code. So you have to determine, okay, so what is the scope? Like, what does it involve? What kind of assessment do I need to do? So you do have to kind of establish what it is that you want to assess. There is no generic assessment. Is it a network assessment? Is it an application assessment? Is it an access control assessment? So you have to kind of, come up with the scope. Then understand the AWS environment that is connected to those scope, right? So how much application I have, what language is it, what is the network configuration? So all those things you have to understand. Then one of the best thing to do is to follow the best practice. So AWS has plenty of documentation when it comes to best practices. So when you are doing assessments on whatever the scope that you're looking for, whether it is the operating system or the application or the network, there's going to be best practice documents that you can follow. So compare your environment with the AWS best practices or CIS best practices, right? And see where the gaps are. And that could be one measuring stick as to how well you're doing. Okay, then start using these AWS security services such as GuardDuty, such as Inspector, because they'll give you a report that will assess your environment against those best practices. Okay, so that'll be a good one. Also, one of the more important places for you to do the assessment is the IAM, right? So you want to make sure that the IAM policies and access management is good to go, right? Because no matter what you do on all the other places, if your access control is not is not up to date, or it's not doing the least privilege rule, then that is going to ruin everything else that you may do in your AWS. So make sure you go through the policies and make sure that no one is over permission, that you are actually following the least privilege rule. Okay, and you may want to make sure that your data protection, such as encryption, is also up to date as well. Remember, rotating keys and such. Keys is something like, it's very similar to passwords. You do have to change them once in a while to make sure that nobody else has gotten that hold of that key and try to decrypt your data, right? So you don't want to do that. So you want to make sure that you review your data protection, right? So that's the assessment that you would do. Also monitoring, right? Using CloudWatch, using CloudTrail, auditing, using AWS Config. So that's going to be, it's a continuous auditing process, continuous assessment that goes on. Okay, and then perform regular reviews just like anything else. It's not just about the cloud. You don't want to say, oh, we did an annual review and that's it. No, right? In the cloud, you have to do it more often because things change often. It's dynamic. So trying to put into place an automated way that you are able to assess your environment. Okay, I think that would be my suggestion to you.
Once again, I want to remind you that as you leave the session today, you will be presented with a short survey. We would like to request for you to help us by taking a quick moment to participate in that survey. Your feedback really helps us understand your learning experience as we are constantly looking at how we can improve our future sessions. The survey answers are measured on a scale of 1 to 5, 5 representing outstanding and 1 representing poor. We want to thank all of you for joining us today, and if you do come up with any additional questions, feel free to send them to webinar@netcomlearning.com at any time. We hope that you found today's webinar informative, and we look forward to seeing you back here with us soon. Feel free to tell your friends and colleagues about our webinars and other courses. Have a great day, everyone.